Mood, everybody.
I'm in a bad mood.
Guess what? So am I.
Be grumpy,
Guess what?
Never. You guys
grumpy.
never
More
in a bad
dancing, more dancing. Everybody has
More
to dance.
dancing. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks,
You are
Suzanne.
right.
Want to see what I'm wearing today, you guys? My first pair of pants I ever mended with Katrina Rodabaugh. Look at this. Look at this.
Woo!
Look at this.
You're so
Looking
cute.
good. Looking good. Looking good.
I was going to wear my activist jacket today, Katrina, that I've been sewing patches on to not so much mend, but make new.
Yeah, embellish.
Embellish.
Oh,
Mhm.
what a nice way of saying that.
Yeah.
Like English.
All right. Okay. Are we like,
No.
That's what we used
No.
to do in the 60s and 70s. I wish I saved those pants. I can sell them for fortune.
Yeah.
All those patches. Okay, now I got to mute. Sorry.
do.
See, Katrina?
Is the chat supposed to be muted?
It is.
ma'am.
Eva.
Okay.
Till the end of the
Yep.
presentation.
And then we'll unmute everyone. Yep. Why do I? Oh, I see. I hit a little button. I couldn't see everybody.
All right.
Looks like Dorothy's about to do some kind of like there's a show behind her or something.
Magic show.
Magic show.
Yeah, I have a presentation to give on Monday.
Oh,
So,
well, it's a good backdrop. I'm hoping it's Cochineal died. Okay, well, they're still coming in, Kathy, but
Yep. I see him.
what do you want to do? You want to kick off this party?
Yeah, why not? Let's
Why
get
not? Let's kick it
started
off.
and we'll let them in as they show up.
Katrina. Katrina, this is Katrina's 1-year anniversary. She was here a year ago and she has not seen all our Feedback Fridays to know how crazy it's gone. So there's that. All right, Kathy, here I
Here
go.
we go.
Okay, Suzanne, you ready? Okay.
Well, it's the end of the week. Now where you been? Well, now it's Feedback Friday, so come on in. Come sit down and stare at your screen. We got a presenter that you never seen. We're Feedback Friday, we're on the loose. We'll be the train, you be the caboose. It's Feedback Friday with Kathy and Amy. Mashed potatoes and the gravy. It's Feedback Friday all day long. Feedback, feedback, Feedback Friday.
And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. It's Feedback Friday, episode 52. 52. That's like Area 52. We just kind of end up in this strange place with all these amazing people. And I'm watching Amy's eyes that's looking like, oh no, oh no.
Maybe
Oh
that's
yes.
why today's weird. It's like
That's why today's weird. We are like in that
episode.
strange convergence of energy, desert,
aliens.
aliens. Yeah,
Paranormal, all paranormal.
all sorts of crazy things happening. But thank goodness we have our lovely guest today and Feedback Friday to save us from this vortex. So Feedback Friday is our weekly show where we speak with dyers, artists, scientists, scholars, writers, activists, growers, and anyone else who is interesting and wants to talk about what they're doing on natural dyeing and color. I'm Kathy Hattori, president of Botanical Colors, and along with Amy Dufault, who is our director of sustainability and communications, we are so happy to welcome you to the show this week. Let's see, before we start, I jump around in this script that I have, so sometimes I lose my way. Before we start, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for helping us get to 52 weeks of Feedback Friday. It's been over a year because we skipped a few weeks for the holidays. And it's been incredible to see the number of folks that we have join us, as well as the people that we have presenting and we get to connect with and meet. It's really been an amazingly rich year for being stuck in this corner for 52 weeks. It's been incredible. For a little housekeeping, Amy's our moderator, and she will be checking out the chat, which we will open up after the presentation, and where you will post your questions. We'll have everybody muted for the presentation, but after that, we'll open it up for questions. And don't forget to stay tuned after for picture of the week.
Week.
And we'll announce that who we saw as a standout this week, and have you unmute to say hello. We're recording this call. We'll have a video copy of it available for you this weekend, along with any other information resulting from the call. And let me just tell you who's joining us today. We have the amazingly talented Katrina Rodabaugh, who is the author of Mending Matters and Make Thrift Mend. Katrina is just pretty incredible. She uses mending as this metaphor for living and just kind of starting where you are and just creating what you need in order to thrive. So it just feels like the perfect antidote for, kind of what we've been going through and what we're starting to come out of. I know many of you are either gotten your first or potentially your second vaccination. So we definitely see that the new world is coming up as we're able to get rid of our restrictions and move a little bit more freely around our environment. So without any further ado, Katrina, a super warm welcome. It's so lovely to have you, and I can't wait to hear what you have to share with us.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Amy. It's such a treat to be here again. I mean, I think I was one of a handful of your first, Feedback Fridays a year ago. And then I got to join you a few times over the summer. And then my children started this thing called remote schooling. And that's been interesting. So I haven't been able to join you as much as I'd like to, but it's great to be here with you. And I appreciate everything you're bringing to this community, everything you brought before Feedback Fridays and everything that you're bringing now. So thanks for having me and making a place for so many people to come together. Should I begin? Is this my official moment? Okay. All right. Let's get over here. Okay, so I am going to take you on a little journey, fiber art journey around Make Thrift Mend and how I got here. So this is the cover of my new book, which came out on Tuesday. So it's just 3 days old. It's still a newborn. And I thought, well, gosh, how should where do I start the journey, right? Where do we ever start our journeys? So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start at the very beginning. So this is one of the images from the book, and it's a quilt that my great grandmother made that hangs on the back of a chair in my living room. And in many ways, she is my ultimate inspiration for a lot of my fiber work, although I never met her. So I thought, well, let's just start at the beginning, and don't worry, I'm not going to spend too much time at the very beginning, but I feel like I always have to sort of honor my own fiber art lineage. So the image on the left is my great grandmother with her head tipped back laughing, and my grandmother, and then that's my mom sitting on her lap. And that's actually the only photo in existence of the three of them together. My mom's mother died when she was young, so it's like a really special image. And then on the right, that's my mom and I. So those are my fiber art teachers, as far as I'm concerned. So we'll go quickly. I think that I oftentimes leave like the first 22 years of my life out, but I just did an interview and there were a lot of questions about those years. So I thought, okay, we'll just kind of go over it. I grew up in a small town in Western New York, We lived on 2 acres and there were gardens and a fruit orchard and many, many small pets and chickens. And then I went to Ithaca College, which was only an hour away. And I was an interdisciplinary studies major, which meant it was kind of like plan your own adventure. I had to petition the college that environmental studies was a relevant major because at the time, this was 20 years ago, it didn't exist. And now they have a whole environmental studies department. So I always try to keep that in mind and thinking about activist work or environmentalist work, because I think that's pretty remarkable in 2 decades that they went from having to be convinced that it was a valid major to having a whole department. And also a little side note is that when I was in college, I made and sold dresses at a local boutique for extra money. And this is an image from my new book, Make, Thrift, Mend. The dresses that I made weren't dissimilar to this, although I was using my own pattern and this is not my own pattern. But they were these really simple dresses made out of various fabrics. This is an image from the book of a dress with moon phases stitched into the neckline, so it's on the inside. At that time, I was also doing a lot of embroidery. I can remember embroidering an entire scene on the back of this fabric backpack that I had made. I don't have it anymore, sadly. So this is another image from the book. It's a nettle leaf inside a pocket. And working a lot with scraps. I made a patchwork pair of pants that were pretty epic that I also don't have anymore. And certainly thinking a lot about secondhand and starting to wear a lot of secondhand clothing in college. Okay, so that's our brief summary of those years. And then in my 20s, I moved around a lot. So I moved from Ithaca, New York to San Francisco. And then I moved from San Francisco, California to Brooklyn, New York. And then I moved from Brooklyn, New York back to Oakland, California. And this time I was working in nonprofit arts organizations. I was doing a lot of writing, mostly poetry. And I was going to performances and exhibitions every chance that I got. I also started stitching words into fabric books at this time. This is another image from my new book with a herbal remedy stitched into the top of a pocket on a vest. So then where I feel like this journey really began was in graduate school. So I went to graduate school back in Oakland, California. It was sort of this like ping pong match between New York and California for almost 2 decades. And I did an MFA in creative writing with a focus in poetry. And through the poetry program, we also had access to a book art studio, letterpress printing, book binding. And so I trained and then taught in the book art studio. And it was my book arts professor who started referring to me as a fiber artist. And honestly, at the time, I really didn't know what she was talking about. But she was like, well, you're always trying to like put, fabric through the letterpresses and making all these books out of fabric. And she also really legitimized for me my training with my mom, which was her training with her mom and grandmother in working with textiles. And she was really the first person to do that. So this is not an image from those years. I couldn't find any, but this is a poem that I had printed onto fabric when I first started Make, Thrift, Mend. And I had 2 of them made, and then I would stitch them into the pockets and into the necklines and into the hemlines. So I was always trying to sort of fuse poetry and fabric. And so then, so that's, I feel like, where I really kind of came into the work. And then postgraduate school, pre-Make, Thrift, Mend, which started in 2013, was really this time for me just saturated in the arts, I would say. I was a program director at a nonprofit gallery in San Francisco. I was making art on the nights and weekends. I was doing large scale installations, and I was doing a lot of design for performance. My husband's a performing artist, and so I was doing costumes and sets, mostly with choreographers, and really working more in this sort of started to get into what's called like social practice and kind of considering how could I consider my work part of this sort of social experiment, right? Or even part of this sort of activist experiment. I was also doing a lot of craft fairs. I started my Etsy shop. I had a blog back in the day. That's how I found my way online. And I also got married and had a baby along this time. And then I wrote a proposal and wrote my first book, The Paper Playhouse. So this actually, I started right around the Make, Thrift, Mend project in about like summer or fall of 2013. And this was kind of the culmination of that work from the book art studio and leading into the work with fiber. And it was awesome art projects for kids using paper, boxes, and books. And I I lost my arrow. So that came out in January 2015, although I started it in 2013. And so around this time, I was also still kind of playing with fiber art and natural dyes. This work is a little more recent, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then again, thinking about that performance or that like social space, just before we left California in 2015, I've been doing a lot of work around like social intervention. And this was a tiny house that my husband had built. And I had different artists from the Bay Area come sit with me in downtown San Francisco during lunch hour. And I had someone doing weaving. This is Christine Vahar from A Verb for Keeping Warm, doing dyeing. Jen Hewitt came to do printmaking. I had a fiber farmer come. So to sort of bring a lot of that work happens in this sort of domestic sphere, right? Or happens in a studio or happens behind closed doors. And I really wanted to bring that work into this very busy business district. So that was a lot of fun. We got a lot of interesting responses. So the project Make Thrift Mend started in August 2013. It was just 4 months after the Rana Plaza factory had collapsed in Dhaka, Bangladesh, which is 8 years ago this week. And that was really a huge wake-up call for me and my work. As I mentioned, I'd been an environmental studies major in college, and that'd always been really important to me personally, mostly with food and my home. And I was always like the person in my art offices trying to get everyone to recycle and compost, right? But it was really Rana Plaza that made me turn to fashion and look at what was happening in these fashion districts and in these factories. And I really had no idea. And of course, that was my own just being undereducated. And that was this huge moment for me. And I thought, okay, so for a year, I'm going to just make this a personal art project, and I'm not going to buy any fast fashion for a year. And I kind of thought of it as just like pressing pause, right? It was just this moment to kind of like catch my breath. And instead, I was going to make simple garments like I had done in college and buy secondhand and mend what I already owned. And so this is an image from my last book, Mending Matters, where this is, I feel like, where I kind of started looking at my wardrobe as a whole, right? And I started thinking like, what did I need? What could I make? This is when I started working with natural dyes. And how could I really consider my wardrobe an extension of my fiber arts practice? And how could I also consider it this sort of living art, right? Like, how could it be this growing, shifting, changing creative practice for me? Instead of just considering my creative practice part of my studio work. So that's another image from Mending Matters. And then I came into the mending. Surprisingly, really, I had this fast going on and I wasn't going to buy any new clothing. My oldest son was a toddler. We were playing on the sidewalk in Oakland and playing with chalk. And I scuffed my knee of my jeans. And then the more we'd play with the chalk, the more I'd scuff my knee until I wore a hole through the pair of jeans. And so let's see, I had been pregnant and breastfeeding, and I was about to get pregnant again. So you can imagine a pair of jeans that fit really well were really precious, right? And I couldn't buy a new pair. I could have bought a pair secondhand, but I really loved the way they fit. And so I taught myself to mend, and it was really clunky. And then I just kept working with it until I came up with different techniques. I started looking at, cultures around the world. Of course, there's the sashiko and boro in Japan. I went back to my grandmother's patchwork quilts to think, how would she have mended something? She did a lot of stitch work, a lot of handwork. Throughout Europe, there are all different types of darning, depending on the culture that you're in, much like knitting. And I just started realizing that as I looked around the world, there was a different way of making clothing, dyeing clothing, and also mending and caring for clothing. And that this was something that was just really practical, that my grandmothers would never have considered throwing something out just because it had a tear in it, right? But with fast fashion, which arguably came around the 90s or early 2000s, and really just like two and a half decades, it was no longer common practice, which is kind of terrifying how quickly that can change, right? So then in October 2015, I call it the big move. So we moved after 10 years in this small apartment in Oakland, California. We moved to an 1820s farmhouse in the Hudson Valley, and we had a brand new baby. My second son was 6 months old when we moved here. And for me, this is really the place where I feel like it all came together. And we started raising chickens and bees and all sorts of dye plants and pollinator plants and native plants and all kinds of plants. We also started renovating our barn and our farmhouse. which also felt like an extension of mending. And so this really felt like the place, 6 years ago when my studies in environmental studies, when this Make Thrift Mend project, when my fiber art, my writing, everything could kind of come together in this life lesson, right? Everything could come together on this 1 acre of land. And so that's a picture of my husband and I from Mending Matters. And my little ones, who are much older now, also from Mending Matters. And so I started working a lot with the plants, and I really wanted to create color from this local landscape within just a couple of miles of where I live. And because we moved in to 1 acre of land, it was a lot of grass. And so little by little, unlawning, I just heard the phrase, we've been unlawning our property. We have a big vegetable garden and a big flower garden and the chickens. And so as I was planting, I started looking at plants to see, I like to call them triple power plants. Like, could I plant things that were edible, medicinal, and gave dye color? And maybe even they were a pollinator plant too, right? And this really deepened my understanding of plants and the plants that I wanted to bring on the property. So this is Black-Eyed Susan. This is also from the book, which is a wonderful dye plant. And now I'm kind of thinking about, like, seasonally, right? Can I have dye plants and edible plants in my yard from April, right about now, right? We have flowers again through like November. I have a neighbor who's a farmer, and he's taught me a lot, humbly. I've been very humble anyway, about really thinking about that kind of succession planting and things that will do well here. And then there's another neighbor who lets me forage on her property. She has a sheep farm, and I go over there for fields of goldenrod, and there's black walnuts and things like that. So I feel like we're making this little kind of micro community of farms and plants. We got chickens. There's one of the little babies. That's Lulu. And so then in October 2018, Mending Matters came out. And at the time, that was this huge shift for me where Make Thrift Mend as a project, I feel like it really kind of became what is now my business, Katrina Rodabaugh Studios. And once we sort of settled, I thought, okay, there's sort of 3 parts to this. One side is teaching workshops and retreats. One side is designing and making goods for my online shop again, sustainable goods, which is something that I took a long break from and just launched, I think it was 3 years ago, or maybe 4 years ago. And then looking at publishing books and articles and this kind of online content. And I thought, okay, how can I take all of these different parts and turn them into my business? So this is our barn. This was phase 1 of the renovation, where I was teaching retreats until the pandemic. And it's an old carriage house for the 1820 farmhouse that we just insulated this winter. So now I'll actually be able to use it year round, which will be amazing. I started offering things online, the mending kits and darning kits. Now there's materials boxes, and we've done handbags and dyed scarves and all sorts of things. And the publishing, this is an article from Taproot magazine, and looking ahead to my next book. And I felt like when Mending Matters came out, I was teaching a lot. And we had just moved from Oakland, where there's, of course, an international airport not very far away, to the Hudson Valley, where there's not an international airport anywhere close. At the time, now I had 2 children instead of 1, and I couldn't travel as much as I would have liked to teach. And so Mending Matters was really a very practical tool for me. I thought, gosh, if I could just write another book where my teaching could go to people, right? Instead of them having to come to me, or me even having to go to them, they could just have a book that went there instead. That was a huge moment, a huge shift for me. So that brings us to this book now, Make Thrift Mend, which just came out 3 days ago. That's me sitting in front of the barn. And this is really, this book is meant to be a summary of the project, which is now 8 years long. So I went from staving off fast fashion for that 1 year. Each year, there's sort of been a shift in the parameters of the fast for me. I don't really consider it fasting anymore because it's just integrated now into how I consider my wardrobe. But at first I didn't buy any new clothing. Then the second year I'd buy new clothing if it was locally made. The third year, if it was organic or sustainably made. The fourth year, I think I turned to my studio supplies, which was really hard actually, thinking about where like your thread and your pencils and your needles and all of that come from or what they're made of. The fifth year, I went back to making garments again because I missed it and I just wanted to be using my hands more. And then I think it was the sixth year that I signed the book contract for Make Thrift Mend. And I thought, okay, now it's, now it's just part of my life. And I think each time there's been a challenge, I've also learned a lot. Anytime I sort of hit a wall with it, like when we moved from California and suddenly I wasn't in this mild climate anymore, I was in a very extreme climate. So in California, I kind of had one wardrobe that I'd throw on a warm sweater or, maybe take off a few layers. Suddenly now I needed clothing that I could wear when it was 90 degrees out and clothing that I could wear when it was 10 degrees out. And so, you sort of realize each time there are these challenges. I think in sustainability, it's an opportunity to invite in a wider audience. And it's also an opportunity to find a solution or to realize, oh, this is where it's hard to find solutions, right? This is a place where it's maybe hard to buy biodegradable fiber, or this is a place where it's hard to find something affordable, or this is a place where it's hard to find something secondhand. And each time I feel like that's really helped me be a better teacher because then I have better resources to take to my students. This is an image from Make Thrift Mend. I tried so hard for this to be the cover and I lost, but I love this image because it sort of shows the whole wardrobe, which is really where I wanted this book to go. Yes, of course, there's the mending, but there's also the naturally dyed secondhand garments. There's handmade garments, there's darned garments, kind of pulling back from just that mending, which I feel like got this really sort of micro view at some point, right? And to kind of pull back and say, no, this actually is your whole wardrobe. So the book has 3 chapters, actually it's 4. There's a chapter on building a sustainable wardrobe, which is not about making, it's just about really your mindset and habits. And then the first chapter is make, and it's using stitching as sentiment and special fabric scraps, secondhand textiles or offcuts as sewing inspiration. So one of my favorites, this is my friend Yuko, who's one of the models in the book, and she's wearing a vintage tablecloth that I turned into a top. Yuko's also a floral designer, so it's fun to see her there, doing her work. And then this is another project from the book. That's Catherine Doherty, some of you might know, wearing a vest that has the herbal remedies stitched into the top of the pockets on the inside. And then there's a chapter on dyeing, but it's really focused more so on dyeing secondhand garments. And that was something I really wasn't finding much in the dye books. A lot are focused on yarns or fabrics or working with white new fibers. And that's wonderful. And I love doing that also. But I was looking for secondhand garments that I could then dye. And one thing that I really liked about that process is, again, it kind of made the clothing feel more alive because I could look for a light colored, sure, maybe it was white, but maybe it was light yellow or light green or even light brown. I could wear it that color until I stained it or tore it or was just ready for a different color. Then I could dye it with a lighter color dye, and then I could over dye it with a darker color dye. And so again, that kind of just gave me the sense of this sort of living fiber, these living clothes in a way, that they weren't static, right? Because if we start thinking about, if we consider responsibility environmentally, sustainably, also ethically, from the moment we purchase the garment, like what's the history of it, through its time with us in our closet, but also to its time after us, because ultimately we're all going to expire, right? And so what will happen to our clothing and to our belongings when that happens? And of course, biodegradables are great if we can find them or if we can manage, because at least they have the chance to biodegrade, although we know that's tricky in terms of how landfill actually works. But also just like, what is their relationship? What is my relationship to them when they're in my home, when they're in my life? And I really liked the idea that that could change. So here's an image from the book of several dye samples and some of the tools, materials, some of the plants. This is Denise Bayron, which some of you may know. She's a knitting designer, and she's also one of the models. back when we could travel and be in the same room together. Denise was here for the Sheep and Wool Festival, and she's wearing a secondhand cotton top that was dyed with onion skins from a friend's farm. And then this image is not in the book, but this is in my garden. This is a huge patch of peppermint, which we have honeybees, and peppermint is actually one of the late pollinators for bees, which I didn't realize, one of the late foods. And I, again, wanted to sort of make that connection like to my property, right? To my land or to anyone's property. And of course, if you're in an urban area, then maybe you're doing more foraging or growing things on stoops and windowsills and things like that, or working with food scraps. This is black walnut hulls that I actually collect from a parking lot nearby. One of my favorite last stage dyes. I feel like if I don't like the color of something, I can always dye it with black walnut dye and make it a beautiful deep brown instead of maybe if it was like a yellowish or beigeish that I wasn't so interested in. And then this is Yuko again, wearing a goldenrod dyed sweater, and she's actually harvesting the forsythia branches for that bouquet that she was making. This didn't make it in, but we were joking, and the reason she's laughing is because it looked like she and the forsythia were becoming one, right? Which is kind of lovely to see as someone who's a florist. And so the final chapter is this mend chapter, which is Mending Matters. My second book was really focused on mending woven materials, a lot of denim, also linen and cotton. And in this book, there's repairing woven fabrics like denim jeans and cotton button-down shirts, but there's also some very simple darning on knitted fabrics like sweaters, gloves, and socks. This is one of my favorite projects in the book, although maybe not the most exciting, but I was so thrilled when I learned how to turn a collar. So when you get that fray on the top of the collar and you actually remove the collar and turn it over, patch it and turn it over. So this is actually really traditional repair that I just did with the high contrast thread. Of course, there's the jeans, which these have been repaired more than 20 times at this point. At some point, there will be more patches on these jeans than there is original fabric. And then here's one of the darning projects. This is just a store-bought sweater that I've had for, I don't know, maybe 12 years or something, that I've darned with this high contrast yarn as it gets the tears in it. And then these are, this is from our final photo shoot in the book, some of the models in the book. And we're wearing various projects that show up in the book. But I wanted to end with this because I feel like at this point in my Make Thrift Mend work, it's just really important to think about people as much as materials, and to think about building community through this work, and to think about sharing skills and people and place and that sort of community building. I think in a lot of ways, I'm kind of going back to the work that I did with all the nonprofit organizations in that kind of community building space with the sustainability and fashion and fiber. And also, how can that be specific to where I live right now? And then when doesn't that matter, right? When does it not have to be relevant to place? Because we have all these virtual spaces. So that's my presentation. It's the end. And then I said, well, hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's just a continuation.
Katrina, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Wow, what beautiful colors and the techniques. I love the idea of turning a collar. It just really sparked something. I was like, oh, we can fix that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that's so amazing, right? Like if you had a thick hem on the bottom of a dress, you immediately had built-in patches. Or like we were talking about the other day, Kathy, right? Like in terms of altering a pair of pants, if it had a thick seam, you had that option. And yeah, and that you just used to turn your collars over. People would turn their dresses inside out, you know, aprons, of course, things like that. So, and I think, you know, the part about that I love is that that's sort of this just very practical knowledge that would have just been handed down. It was just like a certain way of chopping a vegetable or something, right? It was just a certain way of taking care of clothing.
Wonderful. Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right.
To start with a question.
Yeah. And the jeans that I have on, Katrina, that I first mended with you in Maine, I'm at patch number 7.
Ooh, that's good.
I keep going. So thanks for teaching me how to do this. So let's see, we'll kick it off. So how do you find out the sources for supplies like thread? I know you sell kits on your site too, but.
Yeah, in the back of both of my books, I have a huge resource list, and this one's even huger. I think I pushed it as far as I could this time in terms of like, how much can I fit in there? Thanks, Amy. So, I think this is one of those places in sustainability where there's not one answer. I think this is one of those places where you have to decide what your values are and what your priorities are, and then what works for you. So when I lived in Oakland, I could almost walk to a Verb for Keeping Warm in Stone Mountain and Daughter, these amazing fabric shops that are pretty good sized in terms of small independent fabric stores. And so wherever they were sourcing from was great for me because I could just walk there and I could buy it. And they are so thoughtful in terms of the materials that they're carrying and the people that they're supporting. And then I moved here and I don't have anything like that. I mean, only giant chain fabric stores, and those aren't even, that's about half an hour away. So that made me realize that I was still going to shop with independent fabric spaces when I could. And for me, so locally is New York City, and that's about 2.5 hours away. But, I think it's really important. Again, this is going to be different for everyone. For some people, they're more interested in zero waste, and so they just want low packaging, right? For other people, they might want the most beautiful fiber they can find, because then they're going to use it. It's going to have longevity. They're going to really value it in a different way. For other people, it's going to be about who are they supporting? Who made this? And where did that come from? And what families and communities can be supported? And I think ultimately it's usually a combination, right, of those things. And maybe I can't hit on every value with every purchase, but I hope that through my studio, what I'm finding secondhand, what I'm buying new, what I'm making, that I can sort of, touch on maybe 5 of the 7 values with most of those materials.
Mm-hmm. With the pandemic last year and everybody holding back on yard sales and estate sales, they just started popping up around here. And I scored last weekend some woman's all kinds of thread and a darning egg, and I found all kinds of things. So everybody be on the lookout for your yard sales that are coming up this summer and spring and summer. Okay, are all the jean men's made out of canvas?
The patches on the jeans, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
They're
Or
denim.
maybe talk about different ways that you can use fabrics to mend.
Yeah, so you want to mend likes with likes. So if you're mending 100% cotton denim pants, you want to use 100% cotton denim patch. You want to try to match well, you could do it however you want, right? But ideally, I think for the strongest mend, you want to match the weight and fiber of the garment to the weight and fiber of the patch. And then if you want it to be high contrast or low contrast, is up to you. Ideally, you'd match your thread also in terms of weight and fiber. So I work a lot with denim. I really love denim. I've worn denim for as long as I can remember. Denim is also not a very environmentally friendly fiber or garment to produce. So I think the more that I can mend it and hold on to it, the better. So I match denim with denim. And if I was doing a linen shirt, I would use a linen patch. If I was doing a silk dress, I would use a silk patch. If I was using, and then again, that goes for darning also, to match the weight and the fiber if you can. I think probably the weight or the type of yarn. If you're doing a cashmere sweater, you might find a cashmere yarn. You might find a, wool yarn that's a similar weight.
But you also did that, the contrasting yarn when you were doing the darning. So it's kind of, it makes it a little more funky, little cool,
more fun.
whatever, if you want to mix it up a little bit too. But let's see, are you working with natural fibers only? And I guess that means for thrifting too. And I'm sure.
No. I prioritize natural fibers, certainly in my studio, and most of the projects that come out of my studio, I work with natural fibers whenever I can, and certainly with natural dyes. I always say it's pretty easy for me to find a secondhand linen tunic or a secondhand cotton button down. Of course, it's not easy for everyone, depending on where you live, depending on your size, depending on your aesthetic. It's not easy for me to find like a maybe secondhand, well-fitting pair of snow boots, right? So that's a place where I'm probably going to end up with more synthetic. I bought like the puffy down jacket. I think it was my second or third winter here. I just couldn't stand it anymore. I'd be like outside trying to play with my children in my wool coat, absolutely freezing. And so, I did my best to try to support a sustainable brand. And I'll just wear that coat for as long as I possibly can. But I used to be more rigid in that. I really used to try to just use biodegradable fibers. And I would say the majority of my wardrobe, and definitely my studio is. But then when I would go to like the big thrift stores here, just like a general thrift store looking for my kids' clothing, sometimes the t-shirt that was the right size for them had like a cotton poly blend. They're going to wear it for 3 months or 6 months, right? And so I would go ahead and buy that secondhand because that's what I had access to.
Great. Let's see. How do you maintain the beautiful color like the goldenrod sweater? So how do you maintain your colors?
Ooh, I feel like Kathy could talk about that more than I can, but this is wool. This is a wool secondhand cardigan that was like a light cream color. And I did a 1-to-1 ratio with goldenrod in its peak bloom. And I think that goldenrod and wool is just an amazing combination. The more I work with local plants, the more I try to find like their fiber partner. I love black walnut with linen. I think it's striking. I love goldenrod with wool. So yeah, I think, I scour and I morden and I try to do a 1-to-1 ratio, and I would never throw this in the wash. Although I do have things that I've naturally dyed that I do toss in the wash. And, I keep it out of sunlight to dry and all those things. And I think that, again, like a plant like goldenrod or black walnut or, onion skins, like some of these plants are, I think I call them, they're the forgivings, right? Because I tend to get really saturated color out of them every time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a practice, I always say. I mean,
well, I actually wrote down, you said that they are living fibers, and this idea of living clothing, living fibers, opportunity to kind of deepen colors or change colors and
yes,
play around with the colors that are in your wardrobe.
yes.
Let's see, Leslie Leonard. I like the stitching on the patch. Do you do that often? Are there pictures of, are they ever picture sewing? What do you like? Okay, are there pictures of that the different types of patches, maybe in the sewing on the patches in either Make Thrift Mend or Mending Matters that are sold at botanicalcolors.com?
Yes. So Mending Matters is really like Kathy's face.
Yeah.
Or smooth, Amy. That was smooth.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah. Mending Matters is really focused almost entirely on almost entirely on mending. There are a few projects at the end that are hand stitching cast off garments or things you don't want to wear anymore to turn into patches. Make Thrift Mend has the whole chapter on stitching as sentiment and using either secondhand textiles or patchwork for making garments. So there's quite a bit more of the different types of stitching in Make Thrift Mend. There's embroidering pockets and, writing words inside of pockets and necklines and hemlines. And then there's also the mending, which is usually just a running stitch. I use pretty basic techniques. It's just usually a running stitch or whip stitch for the mending, and for the embroidery, they're also really simple stitches. I try to keep the stitches as simple as possible so that they'll be available to more people.
Katrina, do you have that kit, or do you have a kit on your site right now that has that little chalk liner thing? Is that part of your kit at all?
No, it's not. I've thought about that a lot. I love those liners. They're wonderful. They make wonderful lines. Those are in both of the books. It's tricky because those are about like 4 times the cost of the wooden pencils. And I work with like local artisans, and, I get the fiber from the Battenkill fiber mill that comes from Tammy's farm at Winged Prayer Farm. And it's pricey, right? And so I want to support these folks and I want to have these beautiful materials. But sometimes if I can keep the price point down on something like a pencil, then I will. But I do love those liners. They just make really beautiful lines.
Let's see, Heather, really good question. Do you feel that there is the same or more intergenerational interest in mending and sustainable fashion choices since you began your project?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a ton more. That's not to say that there weren't plenty of folks from all over the country and all over the world focusing on sustainable fashion, either because they had to or because they wanted to. Of course there was, but I think, again, if we just look at the online secondhand clothing options now. I mean, when I started this project 8 years ago, there were not that many options. If you look at things like organic undergarments, I mean, now there's so many places offering those, whereas those weren't available. Or the take back programs, right? Now there's several bigger companies that are taking back their clothing when you're done with it. And that wasn't happening then either, or at least not on the scale it is now.
For sure. Okay, do you make up your patterns or do you get them from other pieces? Like, so how are you getting your patterns?
Yeah, so the patterns for the garments I do make up my own patterns, but I'm not a pattern designer. My way of doing it is pretty much chaos, right? I just like am altering it like 18 times to get it where I want it. But all of the patterns in Make Thrift Mend are available patterns with indie pattern makers. So Sonia Phillips has one of her patterns in here from 100 Acts of Sewing. Meg McElwee of So Liberated, I have one of her patterns in here. So there's, their patterns are actually available for purchase.
This is more of a statement than a question, but I think it's something interesting to talk about, as it certainly has come up when I've talked about you and mending and stitching and repair. So Dorothy Yuki says, love your philosophy. Being Japanese and the Boro, I had no problem with mending. However, when I taught in the Sierra Gorda ecological group, there was a real hesitancy to mend. It showed to them of being poor.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of being, you mend because you're poor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something to consider, and that's going to be different for everyone, right? Some people are going to have a different approach to mending. Maybe they want it to be less visible. Maybe that's based on a class background, or maybe that's, based on being poor. I think there can be a lot of shame around that, right? Which I come from a very mixed class family, so I can see that in certain family members for sure. I think one of my favorite comments from Mending Matters, my mother just turned 80 and her neighbor is a few years older than her, and we were out for ice cream and I met my mom's neighbor out for ice cream. And she said that Mending Matters helped her think differently about her wardrobe because it made her realize that the pieces that she had kept around for decades because they still worked for her was actually a choice instead of being something that wasn't fashionable, or instead of being something that she couldn't afford new. And I feel like that was just like one of my favorite statements ever, right? Because I do want it to be individual to the person. I want it to make sense to them. I want it to feel relevant for them. I want it to feel exciting. And that's going to be different for each of us. And I think if we can embrace that and then share those differences, right? And share our different philosophies, then that's how we can be a community together. And, I also work from home, and I think of some of the positions that I had that I might not have been comfortable wearing very highly visible mended clothing, depending on if I was meeting with funders that day or meeting with board members that day. So yeah, I think that it does depend on the person for sure.
I think a lot of times too, those the visible mending actually starts a lot of conversations. I'm sure your jeans start conversations about what you're doing, who you are as an artist, and yeah. We had run out of questions, but we just got, and I had some backup ones to ask you, but Janice Whale says, have you ever mended furniture?
Well, I mean, my husband is a hobbyist woodworker, so he's mending all kinds of things and rebuilding all kinds of things. But I'm guessing you mean like actually stitching on upholstery. And I've never done that, but certainly other folks, lots of people have.
So can you, I quickly brought your site up, but because I've been there a couple times, but do you have online classes or in-person classes happening this summer? What are you doing for your classes?
I do. Yeah. So I haven't taught since I think fall 2019, except for I had my first online class in March. And then I have an online mending class. I'm doing them Saturday afternoons live on Zoom, at least for now. I have one on, I think it's May 22nd, a mending class. And then I have a natural dye class on June 12th. And I hope to have them my next round, these are live and they're like a Saturday afternoon, and they've been really nice because it can sort of be this small group of folks. I find you can really go deeper, and they're long, 3 hours, which is nice. But I also want to create some that are not time dependent, because it's tricky across time zones, as you know, and just with people's different schedules. So hopefully this summer I'll also add some that are, that you can just do at your own pace.
So are you going to combine it with the mending and natural dyeing, and just kind of?
Right now they're separate. I sort of have 3 classes that I teach. I teach a sustainable fashion class, which is more like philosophy and mindset. And then I do the mending class and then the natural dye class. And right now they've been separate. I'm kind of still debating on if I'm going to do like a grand, huge, giant class that would be in sections, or if they'd kind of be one-offs. But I do have 2 available now. And I also have some new products in the shop. I have some materials kits in the shop. I think there's 1 mending kit left until we add some more, and the books. And I'm not teaching in person this year, but I absolutely will be teaching in person next year, maybe even this fall. I mean, oftentimes you're starting these things 3 or 6 months ahead. For the retreats, I plan them 6 to 9 months ahead. And 6 to 9 months ago, we're in a really different place than we are right now. My husband and I have both been fully vaccinated, so that's exciting. That was something I kind of couldn't even imagine last winter. So I will definitely be teaching again next year.
Yeah. And just a plug for Katrina's classes, you'll learn from her, but also it's like drinking a glass of wine or whatever your calming thing of choice is. But it's very peaceful. You're very focused on the thread and the sort of meditation as you go too, which I appreciated when I had taken a class with you. So Denise Hickson's asking, can Katrina tell us about the scarf she is wearing?
Yes, it's just a very simple pattern. So somewhere along the way, I taught myself basic knitting again, which was something I had done in my 20s in Brooklyn, but I never got very far. And then when we moved back, I taught myself to knit again, or to knit a little better, mostly because I want to be able to use the local fiber. I mean, I have a fiber farm that's like less than 10 miles from me. I want to use her wool and use local plants and be able to make accessories, or I hear eventually I might be able to make a sweater, although that still feels like a herd of unicorns showing up, but I'm sure maybe eventually I'll be able to do it. So this is just a really simple cowl. I'm trying to remember where I got the pattern, and it's totally escaping me. And the yarn is from Echo View Fiber Mill in North Carolina. I taught there 2 years ago, I think. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm getting some really funny direct messages, but
Katrina.
Katrina.
Wow, that was.
Says we have to go on a wool sweater hunt to start dyeing.
Yeah.
And
wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, let's.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the
chat close. Maybe I should see what's happening over here.
Oh, the chat is vibrant and wonderful.
Katrina, the chat, the videos.
Yeah, there's just like this scrolling thing.
Lots of people have experiences with you and have really funny and really sentimental things that they're writing to you on the side.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, you can review those.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna just move along here. Just to wrap up, again, Katrina, it was such a pleasure and such an honor to have you share. We're so happy we're helping celebrate the launch of your new book. Congratulations on that. That's just amazing. Like all these people I really admire, they're like on book 2 or book 3. This is fantastic. So we have a really
on our site, by the way, because I saw people asking, and I put the link in there, but I can put it.
Yeah, it's such a rich resource for us to be able to both have the volumes as well as meet the authors. I mean, there is no world that I ever thought that this would be possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's such a joy to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm just going to end with a few reminders and announcements, and then talk about who we have next week. And then I'm going to turn it over to Amy to do picture of the week.
Week.
There you go. Thank you, Amy. So just a few things. We do have a couple of books that we've put on sale on the site. We're also carrying Katrina's books, both of them, Make Thrift Mend and of course Mending Matters. But the sale books are apropos to environmentalism, as also an environmental studies major, and feminism, which is great. So Fibershed, which is written by Rebecca Burgess of Fibershed, and then also All We Can Save, which is a collection of essays by scientists, artists, writers, all sorts of interesting people who are um, involved in both feminism, the climate crisis, and many of these women are people of color. So we're getting different perspectives, and it's a very powerful book. Highly recommend that you take a look at it. So we've got both of those available. We also got our logwood back, finally. I don't know, many of you are aware that the supply chains have been severely disrupted, because even though we're getting to a point where people are getting vaccinated here in the United States, nearly every other country in the world is nowhere at the level that we are of having vaccinations. So some of them are experiencing incredibly horrific surges in COVID, and it's impacting the way that we can get some materials. So we're just hoping and praying that they get access to vaccinations and that we start to see the calming of COVID globally. So the logwood is here though, which is exciting, and we've got a lot of it. So it's there for you to play with to get an amazing purple shade. We also still have openings for Abu Bakr Fofana's workshops. And something that's kind of sad, but also, actually it's very sad, but also quite amazing is the sad part is that the Portland Garment Factory, which those of you who are in the Pacific Northwest know them. They are pretty much the go-to sewing factory, mentor, supporter. If you're a smaller brand and wanted to get started, they were the people that you had sew your first collection. They've been in business for over 10 years. They've been just an amazing part of our community here. And last week or earlier this week, their factory got burned to the ground by an arson. They believe it was set by arson. And so they have a GoFundMe. And if you are able, they're just so deserving of your support. It's a woman-owned company. It's community-based. It's diverse. They'll work with you if you're a rank beginner all the way to a kind of a thriving small brand. They're regional. They're just incredible people. So I think that anything that we could do to help them and try to help them get back on their feet would be most appreciated. You can check out their Instagram. They also have this GoFundMe, which I believe you put in the link in the chat.
Yeah.
And yeah, if we can help them, I just can't recommend a better place to support a bit.
You know what's exciting, Kathy? I just looked. They were trying to get 50,000, and they're up to almost 92,000 right now. So they did a
Good.
stretch goal of 100,000. So
Great. That's very exciting. I'm just about to lose battery. Hold on a minute, you guys. And next week we have joining us from Eileen Fisher Renew is Lila Horwitz. Lila's based here in Seattle. She's this amazing creative force behind the Renew program. And we just completed our 7th year of doing an upcycled overdye program in indigo with them. Katrina, as you were speaking about, dyeing, overdying, redyeing, we do that with Eileen Fisher every single year with their Renew Take Back program. And last year and this year, we were doing over 1,000 garments for them. And it's just an epic project, but it was really, really fun. So you'll be able to go to Eileen Fisher Renew and check that out. But Lila's going to tell us everything about the program. They've taken back over 1.5 million garments. And what's really interesting with Eileen Fisher is not only are they taking back, mending or repairing, reselling, over dyeing, but then everything that is just not repairable, they're turning into new materials. So that is just fascinating to hear. And I can't wait to hear what Lila has to tell us. And that's it that I have for today. I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to talk about picture of the week.
Week, week, week. We've said it so many times, like we just need the reverb. We need it to happen now.
Ask Jimmy.
I will. Our Feedback Friday composer needs to do a little bit more for us here. And what was I going to say? Oh, what I love about Lila next week is she's going to be plopped right in the middle of all that bags and bags of gently worn Eileen Fisher clothing. So I told her to set herself up in like one of the rows. So it's just kind of all around her. Okay. Martha, I know you're here.
Hi.
I think maybe you have some tape over your.
Well, my video camera doesn't work because that's my reality of toddlers trying to do preschool over Zoom. And
That's all right.
so the computer still works, just not the video.
Martha Pedal Peeker. That's like the best thing I'm going to see all day. All right. Well, Martha got our picture of the week this week because look at all those colors. They're so beautiful. They make us happy. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about how you got that color.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Martha, and I live in the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, which is part of the Sonoran Desert. In the past year, with being home all the time, I really started focusing on experimenting with the colors from nature that exist in my immediate area. So walking distance from my home or in my backyard. And of course, in the desert, we have a ton of cactus, including prickly pear cactus, which is the preferred home of cochineal. And cochineal it's such an inconspicuous bug. It doesn't move. It just kind of blends into the cactus until you're aware of what it is. So I've been gathering it mostly from my neighbors and from my own yard. Cochineal is a scale insect that feeds on the juice of a cactus, similar to aphids, what they do to garden plants. So a very large infestation can kill a cactus. So in general, when homeowners find it in their yard, they want it removed. So my neighbors have been very excited about me doing that work for them. So all the fabrics that you see here have been dyed with cochineal, and all of these fabrics went into the same dye pot of cochineal that was gathered from a single cactus, and they're hung up in order from left to right in the order that they went into the dye pot. And what was really interesting to me from this particular dye session was the impact that the fabric type, so not just the mordanting method, but the actual fabric type has on the resulting dye color. So these fabrics are all cottons that were scoured and then they were mordanted two different ways. One way either with oak gal tannin and alum acetate, or alum acetate followed by a chalk dung bath. And mercerized cotton, which is the fabric that's second from the right, went in really towards the end after about 2.5 yards of fabric had already been dyed, but it came out with the most saturated color. It's this deep, luscious magenta that is so striking. It's luscious. And all of these colors certainly are pink. I would say that the tannin alum mordanted pieces of cotton have a peachy or a brown tone to the pink. That's just a little bit more earthy. So if you're looking at this, the second from the left is khadi cotton that's hand woven from India, and it had a very strong beige color after mordanting with tannin and alum. And so that undercolor came through with the cochineal dye. And the overall colors is very earthy pink, as opposed to the brighter pink that I see from the pieces that are mordanted with alum acetate followed by chalk. And then the piece of fabric that I think kind of took up the least saturated color was a thin gauzy cotton. And I have more information and video. I actually have a video of this process from collecting the cochineal and making the dye pot and dyeing the fabric. And I have other swatches all on my Instagram page, Petal Peeker, if you're interested in seeing more. I've started a dye garden that I'm really excited about, and I'll be sharing more about that on my page. And of course, I love talking about plant dyes, so feel free to reach out to me on that platform if you have any questions. And thanks so much, Kathy and Amy, for letting me share.
Thank you. Thank you for
just
giving. That was
beautiful.
wonderful. Yeah, that was like better than more information.
Better.
It was like really helpful information.
Oh,
Kathy,
good.
do you have anything to kind of add to anything that
No, you know, it's fabulous because typically wild cochineal, like stuff you harvest off of a cactus in your neighbor's yard, is so much weaker than the kind of the more commercially grown stuff, but these are beautiful colors.
Well, and you are right. You are right, Kathy. So I would say that what I've gathered does have a weaker concentration of the carminic acid. Like I
But
have
it
never
doesn't
been.
seem to matter, you know,
Well,
like,
it's still
yeah,
beautiful.
so
It's still
beautiful,
beautiful.
yeah.
Yes, but I
They're really
haven't
nice.
like I experimented trying to make red on silk, and I
Yeah.
just ended up with kind of sorbet shades of pink.
Uh-huh.
And so I've never gotten that really deep, like maroon burgundy kind of color.
Yeah. These are so, and with the backdrop of your garden, it's just perfect.
And the cactus that's in the far back.
Yeah, right back here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow,
That's
so
great.
lovely.
Yeah, so you guys can see here that Martha's the name is Petal Peeker on Instagram. So she actually has a really beautiful page. If I can, yeah, here we go. Can you all see that? Okay, still.
Yep.
Can you see that,
So
Kathy?
nice.
Yeah,
So nice.
really pretty.
Oh,
Very
look at
pretty.
that.
Very pretty page.
Beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Martha. So let's go ahead and unmute, and we'll end our session and say goodbye, hello. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. I always feel
Thank you,
revitalized
Martha.
on Fridays.
I'm so glad.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So glad. I'm so glad.
Bye. Thank you.
Great
Thank you.
community.
You guys
Thank
are
you.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for those of you
Bye.
who are hanging out, Amy is the hostess of Hanging Out, the after party. So feel free.
Yes.
Feel free.
The cat's away, the mice will play.
That's right. The
Doesn't
cat is leaving.
No.
Hi, Breeze.
Hey, Kathy.
That was really encouraging to see that. I love seeing somebody do that. The work that you do, or not even work, I can see the pleasure in it. It's nice to see it happening again. And I'm so glad you're doing all this work and
Thank you.
advertising it.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Katrina, I have a question for Katrina. Did you go to Mills College?
I did.
Oh, you did. Do you? I guess the written word is still in your work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I studied in the poetry department, which is a pretty experimental program. And then I studied with Julie and Kathy in the book art studio. And I mean, I'm not writing poetry anymore, but I feel like it all kind of came together there. And particularly when I'm writing books, and I've convinced my editors to put essays in the books. Yeah, I feel like it's all in there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Amy, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay. Yeah, that was good. We didn't want to stop it while Katrina was just talking. That would be weird. Everybody's
I
hanging
have to
on the edge of
go, but thank you for having me, Amy and Kathy.
Yeah,
and
thanks for being here.
folks I didn't see.
I wanted to do
Bye,
this
Katrina.
more, but I was trying to do the.
I love that. I love that
Reese
move.
is on it. Reese is on it. She's your number one fan.
I have mine too. Look, we can hold them. We can make them dance. Like,
Oh, you know what I also put a nice bookmark in is, oh my God, there's a whole page on Kathy Hattori and botanical
oh
color.
my gosh, there
Who
is.
let her talk?
Somebody let you talk, and then you got in a book.
And we had an unboxing last time.
Yes, last week when I got it, we had an unboxing, right? I
That's
unboxed
right.
it for a group, that was hanging out after. Said,
That's
oh,
right.
what else is in here? Some hand salve.
Bye, Katrina. Thank you again.
Thank you, Katrina.
Bye, Katrina.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Katrina. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Kathy.
Bye, guys. Okay, now I'm stopping the recording.
Okay.
Done.